History books tell you wars are fought on battlefields, but the real tug of war also played out on cinema screens. German films from the World War II era weren't just entertainment. They were weapons of persuasion, and sometimes they hit nerves so raw, even the authorities scrambled to pull the plug. What kind of stories made censors sweat and politicians panic? Buckle up, because the reels we're about to explore were too risky to show without a fight. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Imagine a war film so powerful that it didn't just shake audiences, it terrified an entire regime. All Quiet on the Western Front, adapted from Erich Maria Remarque's famous novel, wasn't German-made, but its impact in Germany was seismic. Released just as the wounds of World War I were still bleeding, it painted a brutally honest portrait of young soldiers chewed up by a system that treated them as disposable. The film showed mud-soaked trenches, trembling boys barely out of school, and the cold machinery of war grinding them down. For ordinary Germans, it felt like someone had finally ripped the curtain off official propaganda and forced them to look at the price of glory. That honesty made the Nazi Party furious. By 1930, Joseph Goebbels led mobs of brown-shirted protesters into theaters, tossing stink bombs, shouting down audiences, and in some cases, physically halting screenings. The government caved quickly. The film was banned in Germany as anti-patriotic, and even edited versions were suppressed. Ironically, that censorship only gave the movie more weight. It became a global symbol of the futility of war, while in Germany, its absence spoke volumes. Think about it. What does it say when a government fears its citizens might be persuaded by the sight of exhausted teenagers laying down their rifles? All Quiet wasn't just a movie. It was a mirror that the Nazi state refused to let its people see. Kuhle Wampe, 1932. Before the Nazis even came to power, German filmmakers were already testing the limits. Kuhle Wampe, a leftist drama set in Depression-era Berlin, followed working-class families living in a tent settlement after losing everything. It didn't dress things up. It showed unemployment, hunger, and the raw frustration boiling in Germany's streets. The movie's climax was even bolder. A blunt, politically charged conversation on a train, where characters openly asked who really controlled the economy and whether the future belonged to the people or to those in power. For censors in the Weimar Republic, this was already too much. They temporarily banned the film, calling it subversive. When the Nazis took control shortly after, the ban became permanent. What made Kuhle Wampe dangerous wasn't explosions or violence. It was the idea that ordinary Germans could question authority on screen. That single train car debate turned the movie into dynamite. Authorities feared it could ignite the same doubts in real life. Decades later, critics would call it one of the sharpest social commentaries in pre-Nazi Germany. But at the time, the film was more than just art. It was a spark the regime desperately wanted to stamp out. Banning Kuhle Wampe was less about silencing a movie and more about silencing the people it spoke for. Westfront 1918, 1930. If All Quiet on the Western Front showed the horror from an outsider's view, Westfront 1918 did it from inside Germany itself. Directed by G.W. Pobst, it tracked 4 soldiers slogging through the trenches in WWII. No patriotic speeches, no uplifting endings, just exhaustion, despair, and a creeping sense that everyone was trapped in a nightmare with no exit. When the Nazis reviewed it, they didn't see art, they saw trouble. The film was labeled defeatist and quickly pulled from circulation. Why? Because it made war look less like heroism and more like slow, grinding destruction. That message clashed head-on with the Nazi myth of noble sacrifice. The ban wasn't just about protecting morale, it was about controlling memory. The regime wanted Germans to believe WWII was lost because of betrayal, not because ordinary soldiers were broken by endless misery. Westfront 1918 refused to play along. Its final scenes, soldiers staring blankly into a collapsing world, hit far too close to home for a government already preparing the country for another war. Today, historians view Westfront 1918 as a chilling warning that was silenced just when people needed to hear it. Banning it didn't erase its message. It just proved how fragile the official story really was. M. 1931. Before the Nazis banned M, audiences called it revolutionary. Directed by Fritz Lang, the film was a suspenseful masterpiece about a city gripped by fear and a society desperate to catch a predator. Shot with eerie shadows and whispers of paranoia, it blurred the line between criminals, the public, and the justice system itself. The movie wasn't propaganda. It was a psychological thriller that made audiences question who held power when fear ruled. That was precisely the problem. The Nazis hated the ambiguity. They wanted films that told citizens exactly what to think. Heroes here, villains there, no questions asked. In M, the villain is terrifying, but the mob chasing him is equally unsettling. There are no clean answers, and that was poison to an ideology built on certainty. Once Hitler rose to power, M vanished from screens. Lang himself fled Germany soon after, reportedly offered a top job by Goebbels if he stayed. Instead, he left, taking his talents to Hollywood, where he continued shaping film history. Banning M didn't just erase a thriller, it tried to erase the idea that fear could corrupt an entire society. Of course, history proved the film's message all too prophetic. If you watch it today, those shadowy streets still echo with a warning about what happens when panic becomes policy. The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, 1933. Fritz Lang struck again, and once. Again, the censors pounced. The Testament of Dr. Mabuse was a direct sequel to Lang's earlier crime saga, but this time it was different. Beneath the pulpy exterior of a criminal mastermind, issuing orders from an asylum, the film carried a dangerous subtext. Lines of dialogue echoed eerily familiar slogans, some lifted almost word for word from Hitler's speeches. The Mabuse gang thrived on chaos, fear, and manipulation. For German audiences, the parallels were impossible to miss. Critics at the time whispered that Mabuse wasn't just a villain, he was a stand-in for the rising dictatorship. Goebbels himself saw it, and he wasn't amused. The film was banned outright, declared a threat to public order. The official excuse was that it might cause unrest. The real reason? It exposed too much truth about how power operates in the shadows. Lang once claimed Goebbels even summoned him and offered him the chance to lead Germany's film industry. Lang declined, leaving that same night. Whether that story is fully true or not, what's certain is that the Testament of Dr. Mabuse became a legend of banned cinema. It showed that sometimes the sharpest critiques hide in thrillers, and that even fictional villains can feel a little too real for those in charge. Nana, 1934. You wouldn't expect a glossy costume drama to cause a political storm, but Nana proved otherwise. Adapted from Émile Zola's novel, it followed the story of a young woman rising from poverty to fame, while exposing the hypocrisies of the powerful around her. On paper, it looked like a safe period piece. On screen, it was something else entirely. The problem wasn't lavish sets or sweeping melodrama. It was one infamous sequence. A uniformed officer is shown slipping into the company of a performer in ways that mocked the stiff image of German soldiers. For the regime, that was unforgivable. The Nazi state demanded that the military be portrayed as flawless, noble, almost mythical. To hint otherwise was to risk undermining their carefully crafted image. Censors quickly slammed Nana with a ban, claiming it insulted the honor of the army. For audiences, the decision was baffling. The movie wasn't radical or overtly political. Yet, in an atmosphere where appearances mattered more than truth, even the suggestion of human weakness in a soldier was enough to cause panic. Ironically, the ban only made people whisper more about the film. What was so dangerous about a single scene? Why did the authorities fear laughter or criticism aimed at their own institutions? Nana ended up remembered less for its plot, and more for the fact that it crossed a line the regime refused to admit even existed. La Grande Illusion, 1937. Here's the film Goebbels himself once called cinematographic enemy number one. La Grande Illusion, directed by Jean Renoir, wasn't German at all. It was French. But its message of humanity across enemy lines during World War I enraged the Nazi leadership. The story followed French officers captured in a German prison camp. Instead of painting one side as purely good or evil, it highlighted friendship, compassion, and the shared struggles of men trapped in war. That universal theme was precisely why the Nazis hated it. They thrived on division, on turning enemies into monsters. A movie that suggested soldiers from opposing nations could understand each other threatened their entire worldview. When Germany occupied France, the film was banned outright, with reels confiscated and locked away. In Germany itself, screenings were forbidden, and propaganda papers denounced Renoir as dangerous. Yet, despite censorship, La Grande Illusion kept circulating underground. It was smuggled, hidden, and quietly shared, becoming a symbol of resistance in itself. Decades later, critics hailed it as one of the greatest war films ever made. For the Nazis, though, it was the ultimate insult. A movie that dared to say enemies could be human too. The Great Dictator, 1940. Charlie Chaplin may not have been German, but The Great Dictator rattled the Nazi regime like few other films. Released in 1940, while Germany was at the height of its power, Chaplin's satire openly mocked authoritarian posturing with slapstick, parody, and one unforgettable speech that echoed across the world. In the film, Chaplin played both a humble barber and a blustering dictator, clearly modeled after Adolf Hitler. He turned the image of the strong leader into a caricature, exposing the absurdity of pompous rallies and hollow slogans. For audiences outside Germany, it was hilarious and moving. For the Nazis, it was an unthinkable humiliation. Goebbels banned the movie in Germany and across occupied Europe. In fact, even possessing a copy could lead to trouble. Reports say that secret showings still happened in private, often at great risk, with audiences huddled together, laughing quietly in defiance. Chaplin later admitted he might never have made the film if he had fully understood the real horrors unfolding at the time. But the fact remains, The Great Dictator turned comedy into a weapon sharper than any speech. Its ban in Germany only underscored how dangerous laughter can be to those who demand total obedience. Titanic, 1943. Now, here's an irony almost too good to believe. The Nazis themselves commissioned Titanic in 1943 as a propaganda epic. With lavish sets and an enormous budget, the film depicted the British shipping company as greedy and corrupt, making the infamous disaster into a morality tale about Allied decadence. But something backfired. When audiences saw the chaos, panic, and mass loss of life on screen, it didn't feel like a condemnation of Britain. It felt uncomfortably close to Germany's own situation during the war. Cities under bombardment, morale crumbling, fear spreading. Instead of rallying patriotic spirit, Titanic risked demoralizing its own people. Goebbels, usually a master manipulator of cinema, realized the danger too late. He ordered the movie shelved in Germany, forbidding its release for general audiences. Only in occupied territories was it shown, carefully controlled. The fact that a film designed to serve propaganda ended up being banned by the very regime that paid for it says everything. Titanic became a ghost of German cinema, lavish, expensive, and locked away because it accidentally revealed more truth than its creators intended. Grosse Freiheit, number 7, 1944. On the surface, Grosse Freiheit number 7 was a musical drama about sailors, longing, and life in Hamburg's entertainment district. But underneath the music and romance, the film carried tones the Nazi regime found suspicious. It wasn't celebrating duty or glorifying the state. It was showing ordinary people grappling with personal choices and bittersweet emotions. The regime had a problem with that. In wartime, Germany, every movie was supposed to serve a purpose, inspire loyalty, rally morale, or distract without raising questions. Grosse Freiheit. Number 7 didn't fit. It was too melancholic, too human, too unwilling to paint its characters as one-dimensional patriots. Censors pulled the film from domestic release. Instead, it premiered in occupied Prague, far from the German heartland. For years, it remained practically unseen inside Germany itself, hidden away because it refused to echo the official line. Looking back, the ban feels almost absurd. Today, audiences see a beautifully shot, emotionally rich film about love and loss. But in the charged climate of 1944, even a tender ballad could be considered dangerous if it hinted that life was bigger than the slogans on propaganda posters. 5 June 1942. Sometimes a film doesn't have to be radical to be banned. It just has to feel off at the wrong time. 5 de June was meant to be a straightforward war drama, portraying German paratroopers in action during the invasion of France. On paper, it had everything the regime wanted: daring missions, patriotic music, and images of soldiers pushing forward against the odds. But Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, wasn't impressed. Reports suggest he found the film stiff, uninspiring, and, perhaps worst of all, boring. At a moment when the regime needed movies to pump adrenaline into a weary population, the 5th of June was too flat. Instead of exciting audiences, it risked making them restless. The result? A total ban. Unlike other films that were condemned for being too critical, June 5th was locked away because it failed at its job. In Goebbels' eyes, uninspired cinema was almost as dangerous as dissent. If a war movie couldn't fire people up, it was better to let it vanish. It's a reminder that censorship wasn't just about silencing enemies. Sometimes it was about silencing mediocrity, afraid that audiences might see through the cracks of propaganda and realize not all was as victorious as advertised. 5 June faded into obscurity, remembered mostly as the film so bland it scared. Its own creators. Destiny. 1942. Historical dramas were a favorite tool of the Nazi film industry. They allowed the regime to draw parallels between past glories and the present. Destiny, released in 1942, was one such production: lavish costumes, grand battles, and themes of loyalty. But after the war, Allied authorities took a hard look at what these movies were really saying. Destiny was flagged for carrying coded messages aligned with the regime's ideals. It wasn't an action-packed spectacle. Instead, it subtly reinforced ideas of obedience, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to authority. For post-war censors, that was reason enough to block it from circulation. The Allies feared that even a polished period piece could keep old ideologies alive. The ban lasted for years, leaving the film in limbo. For viewers at the time, it was a symbol of how even the most innocent entertainment could be shaped to serve politics. When it eventually resurfaced, critics were divided. Was it art trapped in its era, or was it still propaganda dressed in costume? The fact that Destiny was shelved for what it represented, rather than what it showed directly, proves that cinema's influence doesn't always come from shock value. Sometimes it's the quiet reinforcement of ideas that makes a film too risky to handle. Rivalen der Luft, 1934. Gliders and aviation might sound like harmless subjects, but in 1934, Germany, even a film about soaring through the skies could be loaded with politics. Rivalen der Luft, Rivals of the Air, told the story of youthful enthusiasm for flight, capturing the thrill of gliding clubs and the dream of mastering the skies. It was light-hearted on the surface, but it carried an undercurrent of nationalist pride. When the Allies won the war, films like Rivalen der Luft came under scrutiny. Aviation dramas weren't just hobbies, they were subtle recruitment posters for future pilots. Authorities concluded that allowing such films to circulate could reawaken dangerous militarism. As a result, Rivalen der Luft was banned by the Allied Control Council after 1945. For German audiences, the ban was confusing. The movie had no villains, no speeches, no overt propaganda. But the joy of flight was tied too closely to the imagery of young men preparing for the skies of combat. In that context, even a seemingly innocent glider race became political. Today, Rivalen der Luft is remembered as a lesson in how even cheerful entertainment can be harnessed to serve ideology. The fact that a movie about teenagers and gliders was considered too dangerous says a lot about how suspicious the world had become of anything that hinted at nationalism. The Crew of the Dora, 1943. By 1943, Germany's situation in the war was collapsing and morale was fragile. That's when The Crew of the Dora hit production, a drama about Luftwaffe pilots, loyalty, and courage under fire. It was supposed to reassure audiences that Germany's young men were still unbeatable in the skies. The problem was timing. By the time the film was finished, Allied bombing campaigns were pounding German cities daily. Ordinary people didn't want glossy images of cheerful pilots. They wanted reality to stop crashing down around them. Instead of inspiring, the movie came off as tone-deaf. Goebbels sensed the danger immediately. Releasing a film that painted the air war as winnable could backfire when citizens were living through nightly air raid sirens. Rather than risk public backlash, the film was quietly shelved. It became one of those late-war productions locked away in archives, a victim of its own false optimism. In the end, the crew of the Dora stands as proof that propaganda doesn't just fail when it's too dark or too subversive. It also fails when it pretends too hard. Sometimes the gap between what's on the screen and what's outside your window is enough to make a movie unwatchable. So there you have it, 14 films that the authorities tried to bury, twist, or erase. Some were banned for being too bold, others for being too bleak, and a few simply for showing truths that no regime wanted to face. But here's the real twist. Every time a movie got censored, its legend grew stronger. Which of these would you risk sneaking into a hidden screening? Let us know below, and don't forget, subscribe for more untold stories of film history.